Hi guys, I'm going to continue on page 219 from where I left off last time. It was kind of like in the middle of the chapter of Albert Pike and Giuseppe Mazzini. Yeah, I got really tired, so I had to break it off. My my throat was getting dry as well. Anyway, I'm going to continue now. On page 46, in La théologie politique de Mazzini et l'Internationale, Bukhanin, the celebrated Russian anarchist, refutes certain statements said to have been current in London about himself at the time in the following terms. But in 1864, while on my way through London, he, which is Karl Marx, came to see me and assured me that he, Mazzini, had never taken any part, direct or indirect, in these calumnies against me, which he himself had considered most infamous. I had to believe. It is a fact that for certain length of time Mazzini and Marx were closely associated. An eminent Mason, the atheist leader of the Italian socialists, Alberto Mario, husband of Miss Jessie White, an ardent Mazzinian, and the authoress of a history of her hero, Delia Vita de Giuseppe Mazzini, was moreover a tool of Pike, whom he generally consulted on all important matters. Thus, in order to divert the attention of the imperfect initiates, Mazzini organized a Congress of working men in Rome in October 1871. A close examination of the work of the Congress shows, however, that it was only pretense, for nothing practical was attempted or accomplished. On the other hand, he buried himself with grouping all the political elements of the sect in which the occult maneuver. His agent, Adriano Lemmi, helped him more than anyone else. When Pike sent him a copy of his Luciferian rituals, Mazzini was full of an enthusiastic praise. I'm sorry. I'm trying to see how I can turn the page. Now it's not working. Isn't that great? It worked while I was practicing. It worked while I was practicing, and now it doesn't want to work. When Pike sent him a copy of his Luciferian rituals, Mazzini was full of an enthusiastic praise for his colleague's work, which he expressed in his articles in La Roma del Popolo. The public, however, failed to understand the sentiment that inspired him to proclaim the existence of a divinity and denounce materialism and atheism. One was puzzled to find this man a mystic. He showed himself extremely religious, yet he declared himself the sworn enemy of the Church. Pike's literary achievements were numerous. These were Ariel, Morals and Dogma, the Sacred Hymns, the Sephar H. Debarim, Book of the Word, Legenda Magistralia, Ritual of the New and Reformed Palladium, 4 grades out of 5, the Book of Revelations, the Supreme Verb, the Ritual of Elect Magus, and the Book of Apadmano, which latter contains the prophecies concerning the reign of the Antichrist from the satanic point of view. The theological dogma of Albert Pike is explained in the instructions issued by him on July 14, 1889, to the 23rd Supreme Councils of the world, and have been recorded by A. C. Delarive in La Femme, la Fin, dans les Franc-Maçonnerie Universelle. Wow. Sorry about that. I always have to apologize when I say these French words. It's terrible. From which book we translate and quote as follows. That which we must say to the crowd is, we worship a God, but it is the God that once adores without superstition. I'm sorry. I have to break this off for a second. I have to reread that. It's like sometimes it's so difficult. It's so difficult for me to read this sometimes. I'm going to continue. That which we must say to the crowd is, we worship a God, but it is the God that one adores without suspicion. To you, sovereign Grand Inspectors General, we say this, that you may repeat it to the brethren of the 32nd, 31st, and 30th degrees. The Masonic religion should be, by all of us initiates of the high degrees, maintained in the purity of the Luciferian doctrine. If Lucifer were not God, would Adonai, the God of the Christians, whose deeds prove his cruelty, perfidy, and hatred for man, barbarism and repulsion for science, would Adonai and his priests calumniate him? Yes, Lucifer is God, and unfortunately Adonai is also God. For the eternal law is that there is no light without shade, no beauty without ugliness, no white without black. For the Absolute can only exist as two gods, darkness being necessary to light, to serve as its foil, as the pedestal is necessary to the statue, and the brake to the locomotive. In analogical and universal dynamics, one can only lean on that which will resist. Thus the universe is balanced by two forces which maintain its equilibrium, the force of attraction and that of repulsion. These two forces exist in physics, philosophy, and religion. And the scientific reality of the divine dualism is demonstrated by the phenomena of polarity and by the universal law of sympathies and antipathies. That is why the intelligent disciples of Zoroaster, as well as, after them, the Gnostics, the Manichaeans, and the Templars, have admitted, as the only logical metaphysical conception, the system of the two divine principles fighting eternally, and one cannot believe the one inferior in power to the other. Thus the doctrine of Satanism is a hearsay, and the true and pure philosophic religion is the belief in Lucifer, the equal of Adonai. But Lucifer, God of light and God of good, is struggling for humanity against Adonai, the God of darkness and evil. One must not lose sight of the fact that Pike occupied simultaneously the positions of Grand Master of the Central Directory of Washington, that of Grand Commander of the Supreme Council of Charleston, and that of Sovereign Pontiff of the Universal Freemasonry. In 1880, a charter was granted him by the Royal Order of Scotland for the foundation of lodges in America, appointing him Provincial Grand Master of the Order of H.R.M. He was indeed a great organizer. Well, H.R.M. being Her Royal Majesty. Maggiata further writes, the two secret chiefs, Pike and Mazzini, finally completed the organization of High Masonry, establishing 4 grand central directories for the world, functioning thenceforth to gather information for the benefit of their political policy and dogmatic propaganda. These were the Grand Central Directories for North America at Washington, for South America at Montevideo, for Europe at Naples, and for Asia and Oceania at Calcutta. Later, a central subdirectory for Africa was founded at Port Louis, island of Mauritius, and after the death of Mazzini, the Supreme Chief constituted a universal sovereign administrative directory at Berlin, which ranked in the hierarchy after the sovereign executive directories and before the 4 great central directories. Gallatin Mackey, the confidant of Albert Pike, died in Charleston on June 20th, 1881. He was the author of many works on Masonry, namely the Lexicon of Freemasonry, published in New York in 1845, the History of Freemasonry in South Carolina, the Manual of the Lodge, the Masonic Ritualist, the Symbolism of Freemasonry, the Encyclopedia of Freemasonry, the authorship of which is generally now attributed to Albert George Mackey. According to the fundamental constitution of the Palladium, the nomination of the chief of political action, the president of the Sovereign Executive Directory, was not an elective office. Its incumbent was an appointee of the Sovereign Pontiff of Universal Freemasonry. When Mazzini felt himself to be dying, he designated Adriano Lemmi as his successor. He died on March 11th, 1872, at Pisa, and Albert Pike, deferring to his wishes, named Adriano Lemmi as his successor. Pike was not only an organizer and a politician, he was also, in his religious capacity, the Kabbalist and Spiritist, a mystic on whose personality the following anecdote sheds a flood of light. Speaking before the Supreme Council of Charleston on October 20th, 1884, he gave an account of his recent travels through the United States and some incidental experiences. One of these he described as follows. At St. Louis, we operated the Grand Rites, and through Sister Ingersoll, who is a first-class medium, received astonishing revelations during a solemn Palladian session at which I presided, assisted by Brother Friedman and Sister Wanburn. Without putting Sister Ingersoll to sleep, we saturated her with the spirit of Ariel himself, but Ariel took possession of her with 329 more spirits of fire, and the seance from then on was marvelous. Sister Ingersoll lifted into space, floated over the assembly, and her garments were suddenly devoured by a flame, which enfolded without burning her. We saw her thus in a state of nudity for over 10 minutes, flitting above our heads as though borne by an invisible cloud, or upheld by beneficent spirits. She answered all questions put to her. We thus soon had the latest news of our illustrious brother Adriano Lemmy. Then Astaroth in person revealed himself, flying beside our medium and holding her hand. He breathed upon her and her clothes, returning from nowhere, clothed her again. Finally Astaroth vanished, and our sister fell gently to a chair, where, with her head thrown back, she gave up Ariel and the 329 spirits who had accompanied him. We counted 330 exaltations in all at the end of this most successful experiment. A number of books of this period refer to what must have been a wireless telephone in the possession of the heads of the Masonic organization. A translation of the detailed description of this instrument given in Bethel's book is quoted herewith as being of interest in these days when magic sometimes becomes experimental science. At the date on which this description was first printed, 1894, wireless was unknown. In his house, Gallatin Mackey once showed me that Arcula Mystica, the mystic box, of which there are only 7 examples in existence, at Charleston, Bourne, Berlin, Washington, Montevideo, Naples, and Calcutta. The exterior of the small box resembles a liqueurs receptacle. A spring catch opens simultaneously, its 2 doors and lid. Inside, in the middle, stands a telephone mouthpiece in silver, which at first sight one would take for a very small trumpet or hunting horn. At the left is a little rope made of twisted silver threads, one end of which is attached to the machine, while the other extremity ends in a kind of little bell, which one holds to one's ear to hear the voice of the person with whom one is speaking, just like the telephone of today. At the right is a toad in silver with its mouth open. Placed around the opening of the mouthpiece stand 7 statuettes in gold, each on a small separate silver pedestal representing symbolically the 7 cardinal virtues of the Palladian ladder. Each of these 7 statuettes designates one of the directories. The statuette Ignis, Sacred Fire, Divine Endeavor, stands for the Supreme Dogmatic Directory of Charleston. Ratio, Reason, Triumphant over Superstition. The Sovereign Executive Directory of Rome, Labor. The Sovereign Administrative Directory of Berlin, Ubertas. Caritas, Masonic Charity. Emancipatio, the emancipation of humanity, shedding the yoke of all despotisms. And Felicitas, happiness derived from virtuous practices, representing the 4 grand central directories of Washington, Naples, Montevideo, and Calcutta. When the Supreme Dogmatical Chief wishes to communicate, for example, with the head of political action, he presses his finger on the statuette Ignis and on the statuette Ratio. These sink into their sockets, and at the same instant a strong whistling is heard in Rome. In the office where Lemmy keeps his Arcula Mystica, Lemmy opens his box and sees the statuette of Ignis sunk, while tiny, harmless flames issue from the throat of the silver toad. Then he knows that the Sovereign Pontiff of Charleston wishes to speak to him. He presses down the statuette of Ratio in his box, and from then on the conversation between the 2 chiefs proceeds. each one speaking directly into the mouthpiece described above, while at the same time holding to his ear the small silver bell. At the end of the conversation, each chief replaces the golden statuettes by pulling them up by the head. Every sovereign Grand Master of a directory travels with his Arcula Mystica. This box is personally confided to him. That of the Administrative Directory of Berlin is kept by the Sovereign Finance Delegate, who is actually Bleichröder, 1893. It is evidently necessary to detach the memory of Albert Pike from the great number of exaggerated legends which cling to his name, but with a man of this type no one ever knows just what to think. His reputation as an occultist had overstepped the doors of the lodges and inner shrines. Everyone knew from hearsay that he gave himself up to Luciferian practices. One moment. Owing to the discredit cast upon Vattel's writings, we now quote the corroboration of the existence of such rites as described above from the well-known Theosophist Mrs. Alice A. Bailey's book Initiation, Human and Solar. Published in 1922 by the Lucifer Publishing Company in New York, which has never been challenged, such quotations touch upon the following subjects: description of the deity, description of initiation and fire, description of sex and fire, description of the 7 rays. Number 1. The Lord of the world, the one initiator, he who is called in the Bible the Ancient of Days, and in the Hindu scriptures the first Kumara, he, Sanat Kumara it is, who from his throne at the Shambhala in the Gobi Desert presides over the Lodge of Masters, and holds in his hands the reins of government in all 3 departments. Called in some scriptures the Great Sacrifice, he has chosen to watch over the evolution of man and devas, until all have been occultly saved. He it is who 4 times a year meets in conference with all the showhands and masters, and authorizes what shall be done to further the ends of the evolution. Call it Lucifer, Satan, or the devil. It is always the same old manifestation, revamped now as Sanat Kumara, and while he may indeed seem to be a very good God, his presence alone is our only concern at the moment. 2. As to the initiation, the Hierophant utters the word, and the force is literally thrown into the initiates' bodies and centers, passing down through the centers on the mental plane via the astral centers to the centers on the etheric levels, which finally absorb it. This is the stupendous moment of the initiate, and brings to him a realization of the literal absolute truth to the phrase that God is a consuming fire. He knows past all gainsaying that fiery energy and electric force constitute the sum total of all that is. He is literally bathed in the fires of purification. He sees fire on all sides, pouring out through the rod of initiation, circulating around the triangle and passing through the bodies of 2 sponsoring adepts. For a brief second, the entire lodge of masters and initiates, standing in their ceremonial places without the triangle, are hidden from you by the wall of fire. The initiate sees no one, save the Hierophant, and is aware of nothing but a fiery blaze of a fiery blaze of pure blue-white flame, which burns but destroys not, which intensifies the activity of every atom in his body without disintegrating, and which purifies his entire nature. The fire tries to work of what sort it is, and he passes through the flame. At the 5th initiation, the great secret which concerns the fire or spirit aspect is revealed to the wondering and amazed master, and he realizes in a sense incomprehensible to man the fact that all is fire and fire is all. Number 3. Let the disciple transfer the fire from the lower triangle to the higher, and preserve that which is created through the fire of the midway point. This means literally the control by the initiate of the sex impulse as usually understood, and the transference of the fire which now normally vitalizes the generative organs to the throat center, thus leading to creation upon the mental plane through the agency of mind. As to the 7 rays, groups of egos are formed, 1 according to their ray, 2 according to their sub-ray, 3 according to their rate of vibration. There are also grouped for purposes of classification. 1 as egos according to the egoic ray, 2 as personalities according to the subray which is governing the personality. All are graded and charted. The masters have their halls of records, with a system of tabulation incomprehensible to us, owing to its magnitude and its necessary intricacies wherein these charts are kept. They are under the care of Chohan of a ray, each ray having its own collection of charts. These halls of records are mostly on the lowest levels of the mental plane and the highest of the astral, as they can be the most fully utilized and the most easily accessible. While the ray business may be an excellent scientific, though little-known method of keeping in touch with the adepts, it is one very serious disadvantage, namely, that whoever is attuned to a ray is, in case of revenge or evil intent on the part of a superior, shall we say scientist, vulnerable to this ray, on this ray. One is almost astonished at the frankness displayed by Miss Bailey and her revelations concerning the secrets of initiation. When one remembers the tragic fate of William Morgan, the secret condemnation, kidnapping and sequestration, torture and final assassination of this New York journalist who had published for the profane public the principal Masonic rituals of the period. Carlyle, in his Manual of Freemasonry, gives the following particulars. My exposure of Freemasonry in 1825 led to its exposure in the United States of America, and a Mason there, of the fame of William Morgan, having announced his intention of assisting in the work of exposure, was kidnapped under pretended forms and warrants of law by his brother Masons, removed from the state of New York to the borders of Canada, near the Falls of Niagara, and there most barbarously murdered. This happened in 1826. The states have been for many years much excited upon the subject. A regular warfare has arisen between Masons and anti-Masons. Societies of anti-Masons have been formed, newspapers and magazines started, and many pamphlets and volumes with much correspondence published, so that before the slavery question was passed amongst them, all parties had merged themselves into Masons and anti-Masons. Several persons were punished for the abduction of Morgan, but the murderers were sheltered by the Masonic lodges and rescued from justice. The story of the murder of William Morgan for the crime of violating Masonic secrecy has long been a well-known historical fact, but in August 1875, the full particulars were brought to light by the publication of 2 letters from the Venerable Thurlow Weed. The facts were as follows. In the year 1826, Morgan, who had passed through all the degrees of Masonry and held a very high position in the order, conceived the idea of publishing a book disclosing all the secrets of the sect. What his motive may have been is only conjectural. Mr. Weed was living at that time in the town of Rochester, New York, and Morgan requested him to publish the projected book. Mr. Weed declined, and Morgan went to the adjoining town of Batavia, where he arranged with another person for the publication. He had written a portion of the book and was engaged in completing it when he was arrested on a false charge of larceny on the 10th of September and conveyed to the jail of Ontario County. The sheriff and officers of this prison were Masons. His house was searched and his manuscripts were seized and destroyed. On the evening of the 12th of September, he was discharged by the interference of some of the conspirators. Sorry about that. And as he passed out the door of the jail, was seized by them, taken a short distance, and then forcibly put into a carriage. He was carried in the course of that night onto the Ridge Road, about 2 miles beyond the village of Rochester. During the next day, he was taken to Lewiston, a distance of 70 or 80 miles, and from thence Fort Niagara. At the mouth of Niagara River, his benevolent captors had decided on bringing him here in the hope that their brother Masons of Canada would aid them in disposing of him. His murder was not then contemplated, but it was hoped that the Canadian Masons would take charge of him and send him to the end of days among the Indian tribes in the northwest of Canada. Placing their prisoner in Fort Niagara, his captors crossed the river into Canada to attend a meeting of the lodge there, but the Canadian Masons, after much deliberation, refused to become parties to the business. The American Masons returned to Fort Niagara, and in a few days afterwards, a large number of men, high in the order, assembled a short distance off to open an encampment of Knight Templars, the additional power of the sealed obligation being necessary for such a case. 1 second, I have to turn on my cooler. Oh, I'm sorry about that, but my computer is, looks like it's going to overheat. Okay. Sorry about that. At night, they dined together, and after dinner, the chaplain gave a sentiment so significant that all thoughts were turned towards Fort Niagara. The sentiment was, in fact, death to all traitors, and immediately afterwards, one of the company, Colonel King, arose from the table and called 4 of the others to accompany him. They were Whitney, a stonemason, Chubbuch, a farmer, Garside, a butcher, and Howard, a bookbinder. But they were all, says Mr. Weed, men of correct habits and good character, and all, I doubt not, were moved by an enthusiastic but most misguided sense of duty. King told them that he had an order from the Grand Master, the execution of which required their assistance, and they replied that they would obey it. The 5 murderers were then driven in a carriage to the fort where Morgan was confined. It was just midnight. They told the doomed man that his friends had completed their arrangement for his removal to Canada, where his life would be safe. He consented to go with them, and they walked to the wharf where a boat was waiting for them. They embarked and rowed away into the darkness. When the boat reached the point where a Niagara River empties itself into Lake Ontario, the murderers threw off all the pretense, and with some horrible mummeries, ordered Morgan to prepare for death. They wound a rope around him, attached to each end of it a heavy weight, and threw him overboard. He sank like a stone, and the murderers returned to tell their comrades that the traitor had met the traitor's doom. One of the murderers, Whitney, told these particulars to Mr. Weed a few months afterwards, but it is only now, when all the criminals are dead, that he makes the fact public. The body of Morgan was found a year afterwards, identified by his wife and friends, and buried. Although the Masons tried to dispute the identification, their efforts were futile. None of the murderers was ever brought to justice. So much for the oath of secrecy and brotherhood. Nowadays, greater precautions are observed in getting rid of the enemies of the sect. Some little study and the cooperation of a few culpable doctors, its auxiliaries and affiliates, enable the terrible sect to dispose easily of their enemies. The victim of their vengeance, swallowing some disease germ, meets a fate that none can prove to have been artificially contrived. This is the secret of secrets, denied again and again, and yet the charge remains. For plague, cholera, and all epidemics can be let loose on the world at a word from the hidden masters. Wow, I have to interrupt here for a second because I'm reading this in the times of COVID-19. So, I mean, this book was written almost 100 years ago. And what does it say? Let me repeat it. For plague, cholera, and all epidemics can be let loose on the world at a word from the hidden masters. There you have it. Okay. Going on. But to return to the organization of Freemasonry, it is necessary here to say that in many instances where a masculine lodge has a feminine annex, its existence is frequently completely ignored by the majority of the brothers. No mutual visiting is allowed among the female members of the lower Masonic degrees, for a sister may enter lodges other than her own only after she has herself attained the 5th degree. As well as masculine general inspectors on permanent missions, in direct communication with Charleston, there are general inspectresses, high-grade women Masons belonging to the ordinary Masonry, who, while not necessarily affiliated to Palladianism, serve the purpose of its leaders, their good offices being much appreciated when they furnish useful information to headquarters. These women are privileged to enter the lodges and inner shrines of Masonry only, but are not admitted to Palladian triangles. As for men belonging to an adoptive lodge where brothers and sisters work together, they must have at least attained the 32nd, Prince of the Royal Secret, or a corresponding grade in another rote, before they can enter an Areopagus of sublime ecose. As regards the position of women in Masonry, we think that this cannot be better explained than in the words of Albert Pike himself. In La Femme dans la Franc-Maçonnerie universelle, page 578, De la Rive states that on July 14, 1889, Albert Pike, Sovereign Pontiff of the Universal Freemasonry, addressed to the 23rd Supreme Confederated Councils of the world the following instructions, which we quote herewith in part. To the science of Faust, the real Mason will join the impassibility of Job. He will eradicate superstition from his heart and cultivate decision of character. He will accept pleasure only when he wishes it, and will wish it only when he should do so. We earnestly recommend the creation of lodges of adoption. They are indispensable to the formation of Masons who are indeed masters of themselves. The nest, this is a word I don't even know, the pnest, tries to subdue his flesh by enforced celibacy. The real Mason, on the contrary, reaches perfection, that is to say, achieves self-mastery, by using his seal in the lodges of adoption in submitting to all natural ordeals. Commerce with women belonging to all brethren forms for him an armor against those passions which led hearts astray. He alone can really possess voluptuousness. To be able at will to use it or to abstain is a twofold power. Woman fetters thee by thy desires. We say to the adept, well, use women often and without passion. Thou wilt thus become master of thy desires, and thou wilt enchain woman. Ha, ha, ha. I'm sorry, I had to say that. From which it must perforce result that the real Mason will succeed in easily solving the problems of the flesh. Oh my goodness. Yeah, right. Thou wilt enchain women. It is evidently not absolutely necessary that the man whom you are leading towards the high grades be immediately perfect and have understood our secret on his entrance into Masonry. That which we ask you is first to observe him with the greatest care during his apprenticeship, and afterwards, when he enters the lodge of adoption, as companion, to use that as your criterion, your instrument of infallible control. The Lodge of Brothers, which has failed to annex a Lodge of Sisters, is incomplete and destined inevitably never to produce anything but brethren, with whom politics are the chief concern, men who will be chiefly preoccupied with intrigue and rivalry, who will do bad work and whose politics will be incoherent. Dr. Patel elucidates this point in the following terms. Concerning androgynous lodges, Masons generally give the same answer. They either say, yes, once upon a time there were sister Masons, but there are none any longer, or, if forced to make a concession, they say lodges admitting women are irregular and function entirely outside of Masonry property, unrecognized by Grand Orients or Supreme Councils. Having referred to the great care exercised to hide the existence of their sister Masons, it is now opportune to expose the ruse employed in stifling further investigation. From time to time, one of the semi-initiates is urged to bring a resolution suggesting the establishment of feminine lodges, and a petition is drawn up and sent to the Grand Orient or Supreme Council, whereupon the chiefs gravely insert a decree in the official bulletin rejecting the petition and emphasizing the point that the Constitution is opposed to the creation of regular female lodges. Then, whenever the question of sister Masons is raised in the profane press, quick, the Grand Orients and Supreme Councils publish these famous decrees. In certain cities where Masonic secrecy is less carefully guarded, a part of the Masonic premises is available for the use of the profane public and daily lectures or instructions of the brother professors. In these rooms, every evening, accounting, stenography, foreign languages, and other popular professional accomplishments are taught. A great activity is thus created around Masonic headquarters, and the entrance of a woman more or less attracts no attention. The sister Masons, however, know to which room they must go, and once past the threshold of the building, it is not to the professional lecture room that they wend their way. In connection with Eastern occultism and its organization, Dr. Patel made the following statement and curious deduction. A number of satanic monasteries are concealed today under the guise of Mussulman harems or annexes to Lama or Brahmin monasteries, but it is possible that some day these institutions might take root in Europe, where under a deceptive exterior one of these communities might be established. When one knows the true mission of the pink serpents, one wonders if Christianity will not presently assist at this crowning abomination, a convent so-called Christians practicing Luciferianism. I'm sorry, my nose. What the problem is, I think I have allergies because it's like spring, right? So I'm really sorry that I keep sniffling a little bit. The Pink Serpents are Sister Masons. They are the Luciferian missionaries and operate as individuals under conditions of greatest secrecy. No records of the money appropriated for those religious spies are shown. But let us resume the subject of Palladism, as explained by Dr. Bataille. The super right, which is Masonic Luciferian Spiritism, must not be confused with the machinery of high masonry. Palladism is a cult of Satan in the inner shrines of the right, superposed to ail the rites. It is a cult, a religion. High Masonry is a supreme administration involving an organization much more highly developed than Palladism, whose secret leaders, some of whom are not Luciferian, act in concert and accept a superior central authority in order that their work may be more effective. In founding the new and reformed Palladian Rite, General Pike did not create Masonic occultism. Anderson, de Segovier, Weishaupt, Swedenborg, Lessing, Frederick II of Prussia, Mesmer, Perniti, Cagliostro, Martinez Pasqualis, and his disciple Saint Martin, Francia, the direct dictator of Paraguay, Lord Palmerston, General Contreras, Mazzini, and many other distinguished Freemasons practice occultism and work the great work of the Kabbalah. But before the year 1870, the inner shrines all operated without other direction than that of the theurgic rituals of Swedenborg, Saint Martin, Lafon, Landibat, and the Vicomte de Jonquière, etc., and the Masonic initiates of Hermeticism were widely dispersed in different schools which were local and not international. While Pike laid the foundation of Palladism at Charleston, Mazzini organized the centralization of the political action in Rome, and 2 years after the founding of the Sovereign Executive and the Supreme Dogmatic Directories, a third, the Sovereign Administrative Director, was instituted in Berlin. This latter functioned by means of constantly renewed committee of 7 taken from the Supreme Councils, Grand Encampments, Grand Orients, and Grand Lodges of the world. By means of an ingeniously contrived system of rotation, these representatives act by virtue of their mandate for 3 months only. Each of the existing rites, with the exception of the Palladian, send annually to Berlin 2 of its members of the superior degrees, drawn from any country except Germany, which alone of all those represented is entitled to 1 permanent member whose quarterly term of office expires at the end of the time allotted to the particular lodge of which he is a delegate. The members of the Sovereign Administrative Directory are always given 120 days' notice of their appointments in order to enable them to plan what would appear to be a pleasure trip or a holiday when in fact they are going on the business of the association. Oh, one moment. I have to take a short break and check out how many more pages because Okay, I only got 3 more pages. I'll read that and then I'll close it. One moment. 2 special delegates are permanently attached to the Directory of Berlin, one for finance and one for propaganda. At the present date, 1894, it was, Bleichroder fills the first mentioned position and Findel, a non-Luciferian, the second. These officers are obliged to live in Germany and to be in a sufficiently independent position to be able to go to the seat of the Directory at a moment's notice. The business of the propaganda agent is to furnish information to the chiefs at Rome and Charleston. He receives monthly by secret messenger from Berlin the report of all measures formulated at the Sovereign Administrative Directory relating to means and methods, judged useful in spreading the principles of the association. After a meeting, he examines, coordinates, and frames a report of the decisions upon which, 3 months later, the 7 members of the Berlin Directory will vote. Of these 7 members, thanks to the system of rotation explained above, there are always at least 2 who, having belonged to the Directory at the time of the submission of the resolution under consideration, are able to furnish commentaries and explanations to the newcomers. Only resolutions having obtained a favorable vote of 5 or 7 voices can be registered by the delegate recorder, and these can be finally adopted only on the 2nd following month, if they pass unanimously. In the event of 1 or more persons opposing a measure, the matter is referred to the chief at Rome, at which, failing his approval, it is settled arbitrarily by the chief at Charleston, from whose decision there is no appeal. Excuse me. The business of the financial agent is not a matter of funds. It consists in drawing up a general balance sheet of all rights in all countries, with the brother accountant working under his orders as a sworn expert. As above said, the Palladian right has no share in the functioning of the Sovereign Administrative Directory. This should again prove that Palladianism is a superimposed to all the other rights. It is the Luciferian religion and only need concern itself with the triangles which have a separate budget. Being the real hidden power, known only to the perfect initiates, it need not unveil itself even to the permanent committee, which constitutes the highest expression of the administrative power of the great international association. One must also not lose sight of the fact that among the Masonic powers there are several countries where the symbolic Grand Lodges recognize only 3 grades of that, which that of Master is the 3rd and the highest degree. The lodges, like the others, are entitled to send 2 delegates from time to time to Berlin, and as a consequence of having suppressed the high grades for their adepts, these federations are necessarily kept in complete ignorance of the existence of Palladism. The supreme chiefs of Charleston and Rome appear to them solely as earnest, active brothers who should be consulted because of their great personal experience, but that is all. Finally, the Palladists have no need to be officially represented in Berlin, as most of the members of the Supreme Councils, Grand Encampments, and Grand Orients are their men, and any important proposition is immediately communicated to them. Under the Sovereign Directory, the Executive at Rome, and the Administrative at Berlin, come the Grand Central Directories, which are bureaus of registration in the different parts of the world. These are located in North America, South America, Europe, Asia, and Oceania. There is as well a subdirectory to Montevideo, Naples, Calcutta, and Port Louis will put in motion the formidable machinery of Freemasonry the world over. If the organization described in the foregoing pages which were written by Battelle 40 years ago, has progressed along the lines above indicated, one can easily conjecture the degree of perfection which has doubtless been attained today. So, that was Albert Pike and Guiseppe Mazzini. I'm gonna close it out because my nose is getting stuffy. I'm sorry. I must be suffering allergies. Anyway, next time we've got Chapter 31, Practical Politics. So I'll see you then. Bye.